I heard about this and it was the most simple mindset shift that can literally change everything. Everything. It blew my mind in a way that my mind has not been blown in so long. If we just stop thinking about the gap and instead we think about the gain, everything changes. Hey you! Yes, you! Welcome to the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast, a podcast for people who want to disrupt their lives for a good reason, to make it count. I'm your host, Jen Glantz, and every week I'll drop a new episode with stories from real people just like you, who woke up one morning and decided to make big changes, starting with small things. We'll cover topics like entrepreneurship, love, failure, and self-care. Hey, you're not getting any younger, so let's make this an adventure. Ready? Today's podcast is brought to you by Thinkific. Thinkific is the #1 platform to create, market, and sell your own online courses or membership sites. They have revolutionized how individuals earn and learn online by building an all-in-one platform designed for both course creators and their audience. Try Thinkific for free today at try.thinkific.com/Jen Glantz. That's try.thinkific.com/Jen Glantz. You are going to love it. Hey, any youngers. It's me, your host, Jen Glantz, back with another episode of the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast. What's going on with you? We are at the end-ish of January 2022, which is so crazy. I don't know, for some reason I can't say 2022. I always default to saying 2020 for some reason. I feel like I'm just trying to relive that year again and make new memories from it, but I just have this weird thing where it just I can't say or write 2022. I know that happens to a lot of us every year. We always write the old year for the first 1 to 3 months, but now I'm not only writing the old year on paper, but I'm saying 2 years ago than what it actually is. I'm writing 2021 on paper and I am saying 2020. So I have a lot of catching up to do mentally, but I hope your month has started off well. I hope that you have taken this month to have joy and intentions and try things on like you do at clothing stores before you commit to any goals or anything that you really want to throw yourself behind in 2022. I don't want to say that anymore. I just want it to be 2023. I'm just kidding. I'm happy that it's a new year. And I'm happy that the month of January is almost over. I used a lot of this month to consume, whether it was podcasts or books or just information, because I wanted to figure out what I could learn and what I could know more of before I make progress this year and before I do things. So I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts, The James Altucher Show. I mentioned in a couple podcasts before that he is my mentor and he mentors me actually on the podcast. So you can go listen to that. But I listened to a James Altucher episode where he had a really interesting guest on the show. And the topic that they talked about was just so fascinating because it's one of those mindset shifts that's so easy to make, yet for a lot of us, we don't make that. We don't see that. We don't do that. I'm the kind of person that, if you know me, I am so hard on myself. Like, I could be achieving something really big, but it won't be good enough. It won't be where I should be. I won't be happy about it. For example, last year, which sounds like forever ago, but it was only a month ago, I hit my 200th podcast episode. I've been doing this podcast since 2018. I've never missed a week. I put out at least one episode a week. It's definitely a labor of love. It's very time consuming and it's a lot. And there's so many moments where you think it would just be easier to stop doing it, but I love it and I love you and I don't want to stop doing it. But in December, I celebrated episode 200. And Adam was nice enough. He got me this cake. My favorite cake in the world is like a rainbow cookie cake. And he wrote the name of the podcast on it. And it was such a fun celebratory moment. But was I excited? No. Was I happy? No. Was I beaming with joy? No. I was just thinking about how I wish and wish and wish the podcast had more listeners, and I wish it had more reviews on Apple Podcasts, and I wish it had all of these things. And I kept thinking about all of these negative feelings, all of these wants and wishes, and this lack of achievement that I feel like I've had with this podcast, that I could hardly celebrate it. And that's how I am with every major thing, whether a good thing or a not good thing. If someone breaks up with me, which hasn't happened in a while, luckily, thankfully I'm married to Adam after 6 years of dating. But when people would break up with me, I was so negative about it, which is how a lot of us are, right? We're thinking about, what did I do wrong? Why did I mess this up? How did this fail? Or when we get fired or laid off from a job, we're thinking about the negatives. And of course we do, right? We just lost a job, or we just lost a relationship. But there's so much more to look at that we often forget, both in the good moments and the not so good moments. So I was listening to this podcast episode with a person named Dr. Benjamin Hardy. And it's all about this concept of the gap versus the gain. And this was mind-blowing for me because it's such a simple concept. It's such a simple mindset shift that changes literally anything. So oftentimes we view life in the gap, which is when we have a goal, an achievement, or even a negative thing that happens to us, we look at it and we look back and say, okay, what did we lose? What wasn't there? What did we fail at? What was the gap between where we should have been and where we are now? So, for example, when I mentioned my podcast, all I kept thinking about was the gap, the things I didn't have, the things I didn't do, the things I failed at. When I got laid off from my job, it was, what did I do wrong? How come I messed this up? All of that. Another big success that happened to me was when my second book hit the stores of Barnes & Noble. I thought it was going to be like the best day of my life. I was so excited. I went there, I saw the book in Barnes & Noble, and honestly, I felt like I was stuck in the gap. I kept thinking, well, how come they don't have copies on the front table? And how come it's on the 4th floor? And how come this? And how come that? And how come this and that and this and that? And I was so stuck in the gap. And that is how we usually measure our lives and our progress. We measure it in the gap of where we wanted to be, where we were supposed to be, and where we are now. So maybe you look back at your 2021 and you had plans of becoming a millionaire, or you had plans of changing jobs, or you had plans of getting married or meeting your soulmate, or you had plans of writing a book, or you had plans of all of these things, and you didn't hit that success. You didn't hit that peak. So you're measuring yourself between where you are now and the failure of what that thing is. Even if it felt successful, even if you wrote the book, even if you got the new job, you're still measuring yourself in the gap. And if you visually think about this, the gap almost feels like a bottomless pit. It feels like this thing that you're just stuck in, that no matter what you do or how you view it, you're never going to reach that potential that you know and you want, because you feel like a failure and you feel stuck and you feel not good enough. You are stuck in this gap. But what you want to start to think of it as is flowing into the gain. And in the book, they have a quote, and the quote is, "The way to measure your progress is backward, against where you started, not against your ideal." So yeah, maybe you wanted to write that best-selling book, and maybe you wanted to make a ton of more money than you did, and maybe you wanted to lose 10 more pounds and you only lost 3, and maybe you hoped to meet your soulmate, but instead you got dumped. Well, measure your progress by looking back and seeing what you gained during that experience, you gained during that time, and don't measure it against what you thought you were going to be. For the podcast, I look back and I measure the gains. And what are the gains? Well, number one, that I get to talk to all of you, that I get to have this incredible audience, that I've gotten to meet so many incredible people who listen to the podcast or guests on the podcast. There's been so much that has come from this show. I myself also feel like I've grown as a host, and I've grown as a speaker, and I've grown as that person through this podcast. But I don't see all of that when I look at the gap. I don't see all of that when I look at what I don't have, what I didn't hit, what I didn't achieve. Getting laid off from a job, yeah, it sucks. It's happened to me many times. But what did we gain from that? Well, number one, we look backward at where we started, when we started that job, and where we're leaving when we got laid off. Think about all of the skills, all the things you learned, all the things you did, all the things you can add to your resume, portfolio, and just in your brain in general. The same thing with ended relationships, or the same things with books you wrote or podcasts you started that eventually you didn't pursue and you didn't do anymore. Measure it in the gain. What did you learn? Because that right there is a simple mindset shift that can take any situation, any moment of progress, and show you how much you've done, not how far away you are from the goal. And as we continue to live in a month where goals and resolutions are everywhere and it's all people talk about, I want you to start to think about the things you want, the things you want to do, and the things you've done, the things you've tried that maybe didn't pan out. And rather than feel bad or feel guilty or feel like a failure, what did you gain? What did you gain? What did you gain when you finally got out of that gap? I love this podcast episode. I loved this mindset shift. It hit me so hard as somebody who never feels like successful or accomplished, as somebody who just always feels like I'm measuring myself against all of these things I desperately want. I really just took to the fact that in this gain mindset, we see our progress. We see all that we've experienced, all that we've taken away, all of the positive emotions we have from a goal that we're trying to pursue, even if or whether or not we ultimately become successful. I'll link to James's podcast episode below here as well, but I want you to think about that. Where in your life right now are you swimming in this bottomless pit of a gap that you can instantly shift and view it as a gain? I'm cheering you on. All my love, Jen Glantz. Hey you! Thank you for listening to the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast. There are hundreds of thousands of pods out there, so thank you for listening to this one. You can find the show notes for this week's episode up on our website, anyyounger.com. Subscribe, rate, and review the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast on iTunes so that other ears around the world can listen too. Oh, and join our secret You're Not Getting Any Younger Facebook group, where over 1,000 people are talking about how to disrupt their lives, for a good reason, to make it count. Until next week, all my love, Jen Glantz.